John Wilson's magic doesn't demand attention. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It just happens. Clean, inevitable, like watching a master chef in their element. No wasted motion, no excess, just pure craft at work. His work is precise but not stiff. It moves with the kind of rhythm you can't fake, the kind that comes from years of obsession. He studied the greats, Vernon, Marlowe, the guys who built the foundation. But he's not here to be a historian. He's here to make something real, something that matters. John's magic isn't about showing off. It's about stripping away the unnecessary until all that's left is the effect in its purest form. No extra words, no filler, just the right things, in the right order, at the right time. Because of the best magic, the kind that sticks with you, doesn't feel like a trick. It feels like a shift, a moment where reality bends just a little. And when it's over, you're left wondering if it was always supposed to be that way. This is the MO Sessions, and this is John Wilson.
So I guess the question is, do you mean specifically like conjuring or just magic in general?
Pieces of wonder that made you go deeper into the rabbit hole that said, where does this take me?
Yeah, I don't think I really encountered conjuring until much later in life than most people experience it. I mean, I'd seen the odd card trick and things like that, but I loved magic before then, and the idea of what magic can do, at least in fiction. So I was well in love with it before I'd seen an Elmsley count or anything like that. I mean, I distinctly remember seeing a David Blaine special, and then that prompting me to go on the hunt for specifically books of card tricks and things like that, and then finding a magic shop in Dallas, Magic Land, and really falling into all of that at that point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When you were starting to find the pieces for conjuring and seeing things of wonder, what do you feel like there was something that evolved your magic or your thought on magic from the beginning to where it is now? Was there a shift in how it changed on what you believe in that?
I think there were, a lot of little shifts, but starting with David Blaine and this magic that's happening out in the world, that people are believing what's going on,
Right.
like that definitely had the right flavor to me. Like I wasn't in for boxes and dancing girls and like stage illusions in that way.
Right.
But what that can be, that more organic, everyday kind of magic, like that evolved over time, because I'm just learning how to be good at any kind of magic takes a long time. Like I really think everybody needs to, if you want to get good, not everyone wants to get good. Some people just want to collect effects and secrets and things like that. But if you want to get good, I think doing the same routines for a long time for a bunch of different people is the only way to kind of really get solid chops. Like if you do the ambitious card, you should be doing it for 1,000 different people.
Right.
Not the same people doing different tricks all the time. Like you do this one trick, and in learning this one trick in that way, you learn how to interact with people in general. And just getting to that point where I was a competent conjurer took a long time, but I knew I wanted this other thing, this organic, like that real feeling. But I knew I didn't quite have that when I was twisting the aces or whatever, right? Like that, I didn't know how to get to the material that I wanted to do. And that part just came slowly over time, finding different writers and performers that I connected with and seeing the results that different people got, especially Darren Brown, like seeing what he was doing. I'd read Absolute Magic, and like was like, wow, this, it sounds like he has the thing that I want. And this was right around the like early YouTube time. So I could
Right.
finally look and see,
Mm-hmm.
does he back up what he's saying that he's doing?
Mm-hmm.
And I saw his early shows and was like, oh, yeah, okay, he does. Right. How do I do that? I still don't know because I didn't know how most of his stuff worked. Right.
Right.
Um, but just knowing that someone else had gone to this place first and that they
Mm-hmm.
weren't just saying that they had was very helpful. Like, it's one thing to know this is my dream of what I want to do or how I want to be in the world,
Right.
but to see someone else who's actually doing that thing, even if you don't know how they're doing it,
Mm-hmm.
is like, okay, there's
Yeah.
either I'm being completely,
Yeah.
gaslighted and that's not possible, but it just looks like it is, or this person is getting the results that I want to get and they're somehow more attainable now.
Yeah. Do you feel like, well, I'll preface this one by saying I really enjoyed seeing your work. I've attended Way of the Wizards. I've done everything I can. I have the books, just fully dialed in. Do you feel like modern conjuring today is missing some of the mystery that it previously had? And do you think that there's a way, well, I guess we can see that performers can bring back some of that old mystery to it because you and Piers and Jared, who we'll dive into later, but are bringing back real conjuring, real magic.
Hmm.
Do you think there's something missing from some performers today?
I mean, I think there have always been some performers who are treating the art more seriously or treating it with more mystery. Um, but the majority is always going to not be that because it's easier to not do that. It's
Mm-hmm.
like if if you want to make a living as a magician, you can do so by just doing, the patter that comes with the tricks.
Mm-hmm.
You can pack up your pockets and, get
Mm-hmm.
stuff that packs flat and plays big, and you'll do great. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you'll learn how to be an entertaining performer, and and that'll be wonderful. But if the goal is self-expression, or if the goal is to empower other people, or something else, something more personal, then you at least need to be able to play at these different speeds, right? To be able to do something funny, but then do something serious.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just how, some of the best dramatic performances in movies and things like that are from comedians who,
Right.
from this one context where they just give one particular emotional
Right.
response, but then you see them in something that breaks your heart. And
Right.
especially if it's some movie or performance where it's doing both. Like, now your emotions are whipping around in all these different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And and that, I think, is just true mastery of the craft of, like, really getting someone to all of these different places, wherever the role, wherever the performance piece that you're involved in, like, wherever it demands that if you can get people's minds in that place, then
Mm-hmm.
it was a success. Um, but yeah, a lot of people, because they're performing magic as a job, aren't trying to
Right.
do that. Like, if you're working in a corporate environment, you're probably not trying to heal any phobias while you're there at the stockholder meeting, right? Like,
Right.
that's not going to happen. So there are times and places for all of the different things,
Mm-hmm.
and I just really love being able to explore more of that spectrum, and do the things that I love for the sake of doing them. Like, I like getting paid and working gigs too, but I usually keep at least a hint of that kind of stuff going on.
Right.
Even if we're not
Mm-hmm.
expressly talking about it, those things are underneath, and I just really like them being present. These additional frames that I have on my performance and who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like when you're structuring an effect, are you thinking more about the method, or is your belief system for conjuring heavily instilled into structuring the effect?
So an effect will come about in a bunch of different ways. The worst way, I think, is if we're talking about the result that we get from that instance at least, is for it to be based on the method of this. I have this way to do this thing. What do I say to go with this thing? This is always going to be the weakest. Like starting from the things that no one is supposed to see or care about
Mm-hmm.
is never going to be as strong as starting with what is the story, the narrative, what is the thing that everyone's supposed to see and everyone's supposed to care about, and
Mm-hmm.
then retrofitting a method, an effect, something like that that
Mm-hmm.
works within that narrative. Uh, and that's one of those things that, like, it's a piece of advice that you hear early on in the process of becoming a magician,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, well, that sounds great, but I have no idea how to
Right.
do that, right? Like, and that's because what you have to do early on is to build up your your abilities, right? You have to build up your level of knowledge and the things that you know, the craft portion of it, so that you can then solve problems, right? And your own problems, if you're really trying to express yourself artistically or build the best show or whatever, right? Like, those are always going to be much harder than methodological problems. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm consulting for other people, or for, like, there's a stage show that a play that I'm consulting for right now, and, like, the problems that we have to solve there are just so easy
Mm-hmm.
because they're not mine,
Right.
right? It's like, we need a rope routine. Okay, do you want it to look like this or this? Do you want it
Right.
to go this direction? And it, like,
Right.
I've got 1,000 rope routines for
Right.
some reason that I've never used because I don't do rope magic. But
Right.
in getting my base of craft, my base of skills, I am learning things I don't even realize I'm learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm in this show, there's a spirit cabinet, and there's a brand new illusion that hasn't really existed anywhere.
Oh wow.
And if you ask me, what do I know about spirit cabinets or magic boxes like that, I
Right.
would tell you I know next to nothing. Like, but as it turns out, I've read a lot of books that have a lot of information about
Right.
that. And I know how magic needs to be staged. And
Mm-hmm.
looking at the thing that they've built, I can tell them where the problems are
Mm-hmm.
because I can see into the box here, because this isn't sturdy enough, right? Like, they, when you've built up your craft, then you know more than you realize you know, right?
Right.
You've got this base of knowledge and you
Yeah.
can answer questions. Yeah. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I think it's really important to. I think for me personally, it's part of my frustration with some magicians I encounter, and I'm having conversations, and then we're not on here, but in a session, and then we're going down all this stuff, and that's just they can't keep up because they're not well read, or they don't have the resources to have the depth. And the interesting thing about it is that, like you said, it takes us so many other places than just performing in front of people.
Mhm.
We can take it and consult on things. And what I'm realizing is a lot of the magicians, conjurers, wizards who are taking the craft seriously, they do still perform, but they're being real conjurers in the real world in terms of going and, like, you're consulting for a play. I'm sure they're kind of like, wow, we have a magician coming and he's going to help us, and they kind of get nervous about it, like, what can he do, what, and you're here to help them build out the effects in the show and that sort of thing, because you've built up the craft, you know what you're talking about, and you have that knowledge. You wrote your new book, Lesser Magic, is really, I never compare anybody's work, but all of your books are fantastic. I think Lesser Magic is on level with the rest of them. I don't. There's, for me, books aren't. Um, you talk about Vernon's solitaire in there,
Mhm.
which We very briefly, I don't even know how long ago, briefly exchanged messages about it. And I love Vernon Solitaire. I've always found it fascinating. The only problem I had with it was the text in the book. It kind of doesn't explain it very well in the chronicles.
Mhm.
You took it and you pretty much were like, this is literally just what it is. But let's take it a step further. Can you talk about, we've talked about kind of structuring and effect. Can you talk about how you came through Vernon Solitaire and what captivated you about it?
So it's just one of those weird things. Like it's I hadn't even, or I didn't remember reading it
Mm-hmm.
in the Vernon book. Like, but I saw Jared doing it, and Jared assumes that, like we all do. You assume everybody has read all the same stuff that you do, and that they remember all the stuff. Like, oh yeah, this is Vernon Solitaire. It's like, what? Like, what the hell are you doing? Like, he's just doing it to kill time. Um, and the fact that it works like a mathematical card trick, but it is a solitaire game that you can play for yourself. And that kind of makes it a magic trick that you're performing for yourself anyways. Uh, like that just captured me as a thing to do, because you end up, if you've done the same false shuffle, you know, every time you've picked up the deck of cards for the last 20 years, eventually you just stop practicing. Like
Mm-hmm.
you, I should say there are people who do just practice at the same level throughout, but because I know my zero shuffle will look like my zero shuffle,
Mm-hmm.
like I don't have to think about it that much.
Right.
So anything new to do with the deck of cards in my hand is like, is will intrigue me. It's like, this feels different, this feels fun, and it doesn't feel like practicing other tricks because I have a lot to do with my head. And so giving myself something else to do, or another experiment to run while this other thing is going, is really interesting to me. Like, the essentially what I'm doing is trying to let my unconscious answer a question
Mm-hmm.
that my conscious mind will know half of the answer to, right? Like,
Yeah.
uh it uh it's just fun. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very rare to find a trick that you can do to trick yourself,
I know.
but that's mostly what I would use that for. Um, yeah, it's
Yeah.
not the kind of thing that you would do in a formal show, more than likely, unless you're Michael Weber, who has, of course, crazy uses for that principle,
Right.
uh, which is like, oh, of course you do. Of
Right.
course you're such an uber genius
Right.
that you found ways to make it practical.
Right.
Um, but
Incredible.
but yeah, like having this thing that is this more intimate thing, that's so intimate that it's happening for me in my head, and it still surprises and delights me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, that's pretty rare.
I think it's interesting that you took it and you put it as if you could perform it as a piece, in a show,
Mhm.
yeah, the way it's written, the way it's done, and the bonus on there. I don't want to, but I really sat there and I was like, it's such a simple thing that the power level of it is just through the roof. It's one of those things. It definitely has the John Wilson effect to it for sure. It's
That's
one of
just
those things where I'm like, it's real magic. I mean, it is. It's fascinating. Um, while we're on Vernon, I feel like Vernon's work is endlessly studied. Um, but I don't think it's always, with the exception of Jared, is fully, it's rarely fully understood. What's something that you feel magicians overlook about Vernon and his work?
well, I don't think, like, until I had a better understanding of what Vernon's contributions were, I would have told you I wasn't really that into most of his stuff, right? Because if it's um, further lost inner secrets and stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
These things are not most of the things in there are not things that Vernon was performing professionally when he was performing professionally. Like these are intrigue moves, and they're novelties, but not necessarily what he was actually doing. So if you look at the routines that he was performing, they were the Chinese linking rings, the cups and balls, the ball and cone, right? When he's doing these various acts, um, like there are a few key routines, and it's not dozens and dozens and dozens of things. It's
Right.
it's primarily the classics, and it's his approach to those classics that makes them really wonderful. Um, yeah, I mean, if it weren't for having met Bob White and for meeting Jared, I don't know if I would have grown to appreciate Vernon's contributions in the same way, because
Mm.
I see the bulk of the material are these novelties, these things that he's showing to people at the Magic Castle because he thought this is a
Right.
fun idea, right? But it's
Mm-hmm.
not him performing. You have to remember Vernon. They called Vernon the professor in the 1920s, right? Like they're calling him an old man back
Mm-hmm.
then, and then he just stayed old. He was old for so much of the 20th century that people forgot that he was a professional performer. Like
Right.
people try and say, "Oh, well, he was an amateur." It's like, you mean when he was 80? Are you talking about when he was in his 70s?
Right.
It's like, yes, he cut silhouettes, and yes, he did these other things as well, but he was on stage at Radio City Music Hall. Like,
Right.
doesn't matter that the show didn't work and that he wasn't there for a long time.
Right.
He was there. That
Right.
wasn't his first show, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's like that happened so long ago that I think people forget, and almost all of the literature is about that kind of stuff, the stuff that he's playing around with when he's 60 and 70 years old, because here's a fun little card trick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's like, what was he doing close up in the 1940s? He was doing Triumph and the Ambitious Card, and he was doing the various coin tricks and
Mm-hmm.
things, but he wasn't doing, he wasn't doing some routine with four red backed aces and
Right.
four blue backed aces, and
Right.
then one transfers from here and turns over. Like
Yeah.
that's not
It wasn't
that's
a
not
thing.
his approach. Um, and so much of that approach of naturalness is stuff that you really don't see applied because people don't know how to apply it, because you just don't see that level of skill on display, because you
Mm-hmm.
can't, right? When it's happening, it just looks like an ordinary thing.
Yeah.
When you see Bob White do a show, they don't look like the craziest effects in the world. He's
Right.
doing restored rope, he's doing the egg bag for
Oh,
these kids, right?
right.
Like, but it's this very natural approach. Like every move is thought about to, and by move, I mean every movement that he's making with his body and his eyes. All of that is thought out to an extent that I've never seen from anyone not in that Vernon school of thinking.
Right.
Um, yeah, like you just don't see an approach like that. And often when people hear about an approach like that, they think it's not that interesting,
Mm.
right? Because they think they want novelty. They want the intricate mechanical solution. They don't
Right.
want an hour-long lecture on just the double lift, which Bob did at a TAOM. Like
Yeah.
I thought it was fantastic. One of the best lectures I've ever seen. And there are people getting up and walking out of the lecture. And it's like, you use this double lift all the time, but you're doing it wrong, and you're not listening to this is how to fix it, right?
Right.
Like this
Right.
is why it works this way. But getting into details like that, often it exhausts people. Like they don't care about it to that extent, or they don't think it matters. They think, well, this flies. When I do this, nobody says that they notice it, so they must
Right.
know. And it's like, well, maybe somebody did,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, what if I can still see it? Even though I
Yeah.
know what a double lift is, should I
Right.
look at it and be like, that's a double turnover?
Right.
Look at the weird way his thumb is holding that card. Like if I'm seeing that from the back of the room, someone who's not a conjurer in the room is thinking that that looks suspicious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Luke Germain did a Vernon lecture at the session that just took place, and
Mhm.
the entire lecture was pretty much him talking about the importance of Vernon trying to find a way to turn over a card and how it
Mhm.
looked. And it was just great.
Tell the
But
story about putting on jackets.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was him. I don't want to talk about it on here, but it
Mm.
was him kind of going through three effects and turning over a card. And it started with twisting the aces. And then it talked about, it went into triumph and all that. But invisibly turning over a card was part of Vernon's mission of how to make it look like we're not just turning over a card or two cards,
Right.
or and it was fantastic. I think, the fact that I'd be curious to know how many magicians walked down on that, because I could totally see how some magicians would sit there and go, I don't want to sit here and listen to Vernon.
Well, and I said magician casts a pretty wide net, and not everyone cares about that stuff. Not everyone
Right.
needs to care about that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't do any card effects, then hearing an hour-long lecture about the double lift might seem like a waste of time if you don't know how to apply that
Right.
thinking process to
Hmm.
the things that you are doing. But but if all you're doing is buying the new packet tricks this
Yeah.
week, you're probably not going to perfect your double lift, and that's fine. Like, that's your interest, that's what you're going to do. But if you want it to be really good, if you really want to dive in and understand how the basics of it work, then looking in that level of detail is one of the most important things you can do, is to really analyze what's going on. What am I doing to get the effect that I'm getting when the effect is really big? What am I doing wrong when the effect that I'm getting isn't hitting the right way? Like, what
Hmm.
else could I be noticing to make this experience more powerful for the people that I'm performing for? Uh, and and it doesn't seem like it's where your thumb goes. It doesn't seem like it's how do I hold my shoulders when I'm doing this thing. But all of those things factor in. They're all very, very important. And especially for me, as someone who's spent a lot of time looking at conjuring and seeing people do moves, when I can't tell when the moves are happening, it's one of the most beautiful things in the world. I don't mean if I don't know what moves are happening. I mean when I can't tell when they're happening or that they're happening. Like when the presence of some other action is completely gone, then this is to me a very high level of achievement. Yeah. Magic to me includes kind of all forms of divination. Uh, if by mysticism we mean, like, Aleister Crowley defined magic as trying to, one of his definitions as magic as trying to commune with higher forces, and mysticism is trying to become some higher force, right? If that's what we mean by mysticism, then I'll take it. Um, but I'm usually not talking about anything that I don't think is real physical reality, because I always think that's much more interesting. Um, but trying to kind of squeeze the most out of life is part of what that magical experience or mystical experience is to me. And to me, it's all one thing. It's just different ways of talking about the same thing. Tarot is just a card game. They're just playing cards, so they're no different than me doing a card trick
Mm.
with bicycle cards. What's different is the participants' relationship with them and the way that we can interact with the world of ideas with these different objects. Uh, but we will interpret them slightly differently. But they're from playing the game of tarot, and we're just playing a slightly different version of that when the cards come out.
Let's talk about Dark Arts Press. Um, what made you and Jared created Dark Arts Press? What made you guys want to come up with it, create it? it's obviously an incredible, what you guys put out is just amazing. What made you guys want to do it that way?
Dark Arts Press started as just a fake image, right? Like Jared had notes and was kind of helping people put books together, and you need to list a publisher. And so Dark Arts Press is what he just initially started calling him publishing books, right? Uh, the early ones are things nobody knows about, nobody can find. Those little pamphlets behind your forehead and thaumaturgy and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
um, which are all kind of full of things that end up published later on down the line, but just older versions of them.
Right.
Uh, and I guess really around the time that the first book of Paul Vigil's came out, that now it's a more legitimate kind of publishing house because there's wider releases of things going on. And I guess really in 2016 is when uh, the first volumes of You and Me and the Devil Makes Three came out, and it was really at that point that it became more of an intentional thing that we were doing together, and at least pretending occasionally to run it like a business.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's a very small operation. It's just me and Jared, and Brooke usually takes the photos and does illustrations and things for us. Um, I mean, for the first couple of years that I had the website for it, there was nothing on the website, but
Mm.
they show an image of the water.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was just that for a while because I was just selling books through Instagram and things like that.
Oh,
But
really?
the more and more you're doing things, you need to have some sort of a legitimate looking presence.
Right.
And so that's just us pretending to be adults. It's
Yeah.
pretending to have, more of a financial interest in the world.
Right.
Uh, yeah, which is also just a nice record to have out there for this is who we are. These are the things that we do, so that we're a little bit less of just a rumor and more of
Right.
an almost business, an
Yeah.
almost thing that people do. Yeah.
Yeah. I've enjoyed what you guys put out. Even we'll jump into Invisible College here in a moment, but um, I feel like your writing isn't just a standard book on conjuring. It's not just the mechanics or, that sort of way of writing. Do you feel like you write for the magician, or do you feel like you write for the person behind the magician,
Mm.
or for
Yeah, I
yourself?
hope the person behind the magician is the real magician, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's in in part they're little love letters to magic, I guess, Like you're writing to magic in general and just trying to maybe help people along the way if they're headed in the same direction. Uh, to a certain extent, it's just to share results, things that I've had success with or that have worked for me.
Hmm.
But even from like the first volumes of You and Me were it's like three tricks and three essays. It's like there was this very clear balance between like, yes, these are some interesting things you can do, but these words are probably more important, or at the very least are, I think, equally important to a strong magical effect.
Hmm.
And having really just things that I actually perform, that I actually use, and not just novelties necessarily. Um, yeah, I think that's one of the kind of staples for the stuff that we're putting out is really trying to get the actual idea that we think is important across, more
Hmm.
so than you can do oil and water this way. with no extra card. It's
Yeah.
like that's a solution to a problem that I don't have.
Right.
But the problems that I do have are how to express myself,
Mm.
how to elicit the feelings that I want from the person that I'm with, how to take the magic that I'm performing and scale that up to a larger audience.
Mm.
Yeah. Like those are all things that I think are really important, and those are usually the things that aren't talked about as much. You know, I I was doing magic for at least 10 years, which I really started in my like early 20s. So in my late 20s, we'll say, I I didn't know why I was so bad in front of a bigger crowd because I was great with, you know, a small
Mm-hmm.
group or whatever. I didn't realize I was doing close-up material in a stand-up situation,
Mm.
that I should be doing parlor-sized material or something
Right.
that brought things from happening right in front and under my nose to up here. But my body knew. My body knew that no one in the room could see this thing. But my
Right.
attention is down here, right? My conscious attention is like, look, this trick is great.
Right.
It's like, yeah, but I knew that something was wrong. And it wasn't until I started focusing on the scalability of things and trying to understand how it fits in theatrically. I wouldn't have told you that I cared about theatricality or any of
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff before then. But as soon as I realized, oh, this is really important, right? Like
Right. Yeah.
this is the difference between being able to show something to one person and actually being able to share
Mm-hmm.
the same thing with 50, 100, 200 people.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Do you, is there a difference between performing magic as an art and practicing it as something closer to a ritual?
So ritual and art are just different ways of describing anything that's going on, anything that you're doing, right? Um, art just comes from a word essentially that just means to make.
Mm-hmm.
And anything that you're making is art. And that includes making a face, that includes making a sandwich, that includes, you know, anything that you're really doing in the world. You can think
Right.
about it in terms of art. You can think about the way you walk down the street as in terms of choreography and dance. You can think about it in terms of poetry and whether you're spelling out something while you walk around the city. You
Mm-hmm.
can think about it in all of these different terms, or you can just not worry about the artistic part and just get to where you need to go.
Right.
You can think about the same thing in the words of ritual and all of these terms of, well, I'm going here because this is the next step in the journey,
Right.
because this is where I always go. This is how I do the thing. This is how I make my tea, right? It can be an art form, it can be a ritual. You can not think about it on either of those terms and still just enjoy the tea, but you'll probably like it better if there's these other elements in there. Uh, so I think when we're looking at ways to make things better, that's when it makes sense to break them down into the artistic part of it, the poetic part of it, the
Mm-hmm.
ritual part of it. But when we're actually doing the thing, it's all of these coming back together. It's
Yeah.
this alchemical formula of solve et coagula. Solve
Mm-hmm.
is to break things down into their components, and coagula is putting it back together.
Right.
And so if I have this ritual that I think of as a work of art, and the ritual is just the way that I get up in the morning, the way that I
Mm-hmm.
get from I'm not asleep anymore to I'm dressed and ready to go do things. All of that is ritual to me. All of it is art,
Mm-hmm.
even though a lot of practical things are happening along the way.
Right.
And that's just to get, I say, into my ritual form, to become myself, to be dressed as I dress. And then
Mm-hmm.
I go on and have the ritual of breakfast, ritual
Right.
of coffee, and these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, trying to, anytime I want those things to be better, to be thinking about the ritual part of it, to be thinking about the art part of it, it always seems to improve it.
What's the core philosophy around the Invisible College?
Mm. The the Invisible College is, so historically, the Invisible College is more than likely just uh, something that was made up, saying that this is where the alchemists were at, right? Uh, someone that I was a friend of mine who at the time I was kind of teaching magic to thought there should be a school for this or something. Like, well, there's not. Well, there should be a group where we people talk about the things, and then you should make the group.
Mm.
And so he made like a Facebook group for people to come in and talk about things. And it was popular for a little while, or at least, as popular as something that niche can be.
Right.
But he asked me what it should be called, and I told him it should be called the Invisible College, right? It
Mm-hmm.
should be this thing that doesn't really exist, right? The
Mm-hmm.
school that's everywhere
Right.
because it's kind of nowhere, but nowhere is everywhere.
Right.
Um, and it's just a right. It's a school that doesn't quite exist that teaches things that aren't usually taught in most places.
Mm.
And over time, that's become this site on Thinkific where really we had put the tarot course. Jared and I taught a course on the tarot in the pandemic, which we taught kind of two times, and then it was like we shouldn't necessarily just be re-recording the same
Right.
information. We should have a home for it where this exists. And so I found a home for it on Thinkific, and we called that the Invisible College.
Mm-hmm.
And other courses and things like that I had done online mostly during the pandemic, and thought those should have a home too. And so now those are slowly getting their kind of more permanent home as I can find the time to record the stuff. Some of it takes a lot
Yeah.
of time to put together.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Um, Talk to me about framing for wizards. It's something you did previously, from my understanding, and now you're finding a home for it, like you've been saying. Talk me, talk to me about why now, why that's important, and everything about it.
Each kind of level of times that each time that I've offered that course, it's been because people were asking me about it, or
Mm.
asking me before the course existed, asking me to teach them a thing. So
Right.
I had a few people that wanted me to teach them hypnosis, or just wanted like lessons in magic.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I didn't want to have to tell people the same thing over and over, like the same different people, the same thing.
Right.
So I was like, here's this thing. I wrote an 11-week course, just 11 written lessons that I emailed out to the people who had asked for it, and a few
Mm-hmm.
people that I thought would have asked for it, but seemed like they might have been interested. It was a
Yep.
very small group, but I sent that out, and it was just pay what you can, essentially, pay
Mm-hmm.
what you want at the end of the course. So they got to
Mm-hmm.
experience the whole thing, and then at the end decide if it was worth anything. Uh, Styled very much on the courses that Enrique Enriquez has taught with tarot and other kind of divination practices,
Mm-hmm.
because it just seemed like this is a very easy way to reach out to a bunch of people by sending them an email with this information in it, and then they can email questions back and start a conversation about these
Right.
things if they're interested.
Right.
Um, and then during the pandemic, there were more people reaching out, wanting coaching lessons, that kind of thing. And anytime someone starts taking lessons in that way from me, this was always the stuff that I would start with. Like, this
Right.
is what I think is important. If
Mm-hmm.
if I'm any good at what I do, then I think it's because of analyzing it in this particular way. I don't necessarily think that I'm the most accomplished sleight of hand performer or anything like that.
Right.
I I try to cut as much of that out as I can, which is what you would do if you were the most accomplished one,
Right.
if you're really thinking about things. Um, but I don't think that's where my strength is. I think
Right.
my real strength is in paying attention to this kind of stuff, and it's elements from hypnosis, NLP, and a bunch of different areas essentially, and applying that to performance and to magic in particular. Um, and and yeah, so I taught it during the pandemic. and it took 11 weeks. We had 11 video calls, which is
Wow.
a lot of time. It was really
Yeah.
hard to schedule all of these things and to get, even in the pandemic when mostly people are at home, to get, 30 people online at the same time to watch a 3 hour me rambling session. Was really hard to talk myself into doing again.
Right.
Right? Like there's so much stuff to cover. But now that the Invisible College is there, I can record it differently. So I can
Mm-hmm.
record it in smaller snippets so people can pay attention to it in smaller snippets.
Right.
Much easier to watch a 5 or 10 minute video than it is
Mm-hmm.
to watch a 2 hour lecture. And if
Right.
you wanted to refer back to something, I think it's much easier to go find the thing that's labeled that and listen to the 3 minutes rather than
Yeah.
find it in a 2 hour replay. Um, so yeah, we're now we're in week 7 of posting that stuff up there, but some of the
Wow.
stuff that's getting added on is going into previous weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and we just have a few kind of Q&A live calls peppered in throughout the
Mm-hmm.
process. But yeah, it's the things that I think are most important about conjuring, the things that I've learned the most uh, about hypnosis, conjuring, all of that stuff, all
Yeah.
boiled down into a few hours of me talking.
Sounds great. Do you, is it more philosophy? It's just you going over, like, as if I'm sitting with you right now and we're talking about some of the things that you, is it expanding on the work in your books? Is it?
There's there's some of that. It's mostly very practical, like
Mm-hmm.
very practical ways of applying things, even though they don't always seem that way. It's this solve and coagula idea again. Like the first thing that we do is break down in minute detail sometimes a lot of different aspects of how people are framing things, how they're interpreting the situation that they're in, and how we can guide that interpretation or get them out of the particular interpretation if that's what we need to do to give them an experience that's wonderful, right? Because the first thing you have to do is get someone open to the idea of having the experience in the first place, or notice whether they're ready for it or not, right?
Right.
So it, I'm sure it doesn't always seem practical, but to me, it's very practical applications of psychological principles and case studies from hypnosis and from psychomagic and other like
Right.
realms of therapy specifically that are known for giving these powerful experiences to people and how
Mm.
we can apply that. And yeah, some of it is stuff that's easier to apply. Some of it is stuff that is more particular to doing specifically a hypnotic experiment with someone.
Mm.
Um, but uh, again, in just like in studying the double lift to get better at minimalism, sometimes you see the way that fine tuning happens for getting someone's hand stuck to a table,
Right.
and you understand how to get them to really react when their card turns over, right? How to build the expectation and to get them into the moment. Uh, yeah. So to me, it's all very practical, but I'm sure that there's been one or two people who took it and were like, "What is he talking about?" Right? Or thinking that it's all philosophy, but but I think it's the most practical philosophy there is. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, you know, it's part of the reason why I'm so dialed in with what you guys are doing, Jared and even Paul and Pashota and just that whole thing, because but aside from what you guys are talking about, I get a really big kick out of people who are like, I just don't get it. I'm like, well, then it's not for you. You can go ahead and just, and when I attended Way of the Wizards, it was one of the first times that shifted my, I was already going there, but it shifted significantly my process of thinking about conjuring, performing it, being a conjurer or a wizard, and just my approach to it all. My best friend in magic, who uh, he wants to remain nameless, but he was always put me onto you guys and everything. And it's one of the best things I've discovered through the community of magic. And also because it's also kind of like a smaller community in magic of people who are so focused on creating real experiences, real magic. I don't know how else to put it. And a lot of people, when I lay people and I talk to them about, yeah, real magic is the goal, and this is what, they don't get it. They're just like, what? It's just pull silks and rabbits out of hats, and I'm like, it's far, 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 far from that. It's not even that.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the purpose of typing a word is so that the person looks at it and knows that word and that they
yeah,
understand what you mean.
yeah,
But if you put the words in the right order, then suddenly, people tear up when they're reading them. It's
yeah,
like you want a powerful experience
yeah.
like that's pretty straightforward. And if you play with how powerful the magical experience can be, you can play with
Mm-hmm.
how powerful the surprise can be and how organic
Mm-hmm.
that can feel. And that's really what David Blaine was doing in those
Right.
early specials, especially, but still does, like this
Yeah.
visceral reaction to the
Yeah.
physical thing that's happening and not worry about giving them any kind of interpretation to it.
Mm-hmm.
My aunt, who's very religious, but she saw David Blaine and she thought he made a pact with the devil.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
she still does to this day, I'm sure. You
Yeah.
know, uh, like that's not the same effect that people are getting all the time.
Right.
And when my conjuring was getting, at least with the occasional thing that I did, to that level of, in that neighborhood of people really freaking out with the thing, then I feel like you've touched this power and you've seen, okay, this is what this can do. Now what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
to me, just going for that now just seemed cheap, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like, yes, I can make them freak out. Why do I want them to freak out like that?
Right.
Why did I love that she screamed and ran across the room?
Right.
Right? Like
Yeah.
I what do I do with that? Now I have this access to this power. What do I do with it? And I was coming to the same conclusions that Darren Brown was coming to because he was getting those visceral reactions. And then he starts doing magic to change people's lives.
Yeah.
And it's like I knew that was the direction somehow. But again,
Mm-hmm.
it's that new problem of now I'm an adequate conjurer,
Right.
but now I don't know how to do this, how to find effects that do this thing, but also do this new thing.
Yeah.
He's generating a zombie apocalypse and all of, I can't quite do that, but I can access some of those same feelings and figuring out the ways to make that happen.
Yeah. Absolutely. What makes your creative partnership with Jared work? What do you think it is about that?
I mean, we're just friends,
Yeah.
we just love hanging out and we share a lot more than just magic in common. Like it's one thing to both be into magic, but to also have the kind of subgenre interest of gambling routines and that stuff is
Mm.
another way to connect that's not quite performing. But we both love books and fiction and have huge libraries full of crazy old books that no one else has ever read.
Yeah.
But we like a lot of the same movies and things. Like they're just a bunch of different connection points. Uh, and Yeah, it's just a friendship that has meant so much to me over the years. Um, yeah, I mean, we had connected a little bit earlier on, and then found out that he had just moved into an apartment in walking distance from where I was living at the
Oh
time,
wow.
and so we just started hanging out every day, right? Like
Yeah.
we just started going around to we used to go to a bar called Vernon's because it was also right around the corner.
That's funny.
Uh, and yeah, would just hang out and talk about magic and come up with crazy ideas, uh, and then figure out ways to use some of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting at some point with a friendship when you're able to find a friendship like that outside of magic. I think there comes a point where you guys are hanging out or, whatever, and then you go, oh, and we like magic, we both have that common interest of magic, and now it's like
Mhm.
it makes it more special. I think that being able to bounce off of each other, I'm sure in the working process is also really interesting. Are there certain ways that you guys kind of push each other or challenge each other, or not really because you just want it to be organic?
I mean, if one of us has a new idea or something and we're hanging out, that'll probably come up. But most of what we talk about is everything else in life.
Yeah.
Like we don't really. Early on we would get together to session, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're sessioning because you don't know what else you have in common with the person. So all you
Right.
have to talk about is a deck of cards or whatever.
Right.
But we would do that enough that we knew more about each other, and
Mm-hmm.
we agreed politically about a lot of things, and we liked some of the same novels, and I'd read things that he hadn't heard of and he'd read things that I hadn't heard of. And yeah, we were our interests intersected a lot. And the times that things were being performed more often were times when other people were around.
Yeah.
Like, we used to have dinner kind of religiously on Sunday nights. Not a religious dinner, but we had it as a
Mm-hmm.
ritual, we'll
Yeah.
say,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, to watch Game of Thrones or whatever other
Nice.
show we were watching at the time.
Yeah.
And different people would show up. And if other people were there, then they would get a little magic show, right?
Right.
Because we've got things to think about and to play with or whatever. And they're in this house full of tricks and things.
Yeah.
So that just ends up happening. Um, but usually it would devolve into us watching a show or us watching Chan Canasta videos or something, like
Yeah.
we might watch old magic stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not like we would sit around sessioning that much because
Right.
there's really not that much to say about it.
Right.
There is and there isn't. But when you've both read hundreds of books about magic,
Yeah.
like,
It. Yeah.
yeah, like as problems arise, then you solve them, right?
Right.
You have an idea, the thing comes together in 30 minutes or something, and then you go watch Game of Thrones, right? And then you have dinner and you talk about the weather,
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. Absolutely. Where do you think magic is going to be in the future? Where do you think it's heading? I think we're in a really, without diving too much, and you're welcome to, but not to dive too much into the magic politics, I think it's in a very interesting space right now in the magic cosmos a little bit.
Hmm. It's You mean like magic politics or the broader like political realm?
Great question. um yeah,
Like
I mean
like
just overall
magic.
I find it, well, my belief in magic, and I get a lot of flack for it, but it's very split. There's your end of the spectrum where we're taking it quite seriously and we are wanting to expand on it and share it and just do everything we can to make it better in some way, whether that's the intention or not. You're contributing. And then there's the other side of the spectrum where it's like, without naming companies, putting out everything and we're trying to feed everybody, it's a farm system of feeding everybody into the convention and then the online stuff and then the big box stuff. For me personally, I think it's split, and I hate to say it that way, but
So I mean the business of selling magic to magicians is of course going to continue to grow, and like that's what the websites are there to do.
Mm-hmm.
They're there to make money. They're like I said, they're there to show you the latest trick so that you'll buy the latest trick, and then they're going to show you the next latest trick because that's what they're there for.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily uh, to change the way that you're performing things or for you to necessarily get better. Like I say, that's
Right.
not everyone's interest in magic as a hobby. They want to collect, they want to be in the know, or they want to
Mm-hmm.
be seen as a magician. They
Mm-hmm.
just want to hang out at the table like that. All of those things are valid, and they're all good reasons to play. If you like collecting tricks, there's nothing wrong with getting the latest tricks as long as you're not overdoing it and spending more
Right.
money than you should be doing. But
Right.
all of that, like the magic politics and the magic market in that way, I mean, all of that is newish.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't exist 200 years ago. Not
Right.
really. You had places that specialized in manufacturing magic props, and if you paid them, they would have made it.
Yeah.
But there wasn't this large market of magic hobbyists buying tricks in that way.
Yeah.
Uh, and really, in modern times, you have a bunch of little pockets of people with vastly different interests in the magic worlds. Like, there's not just one.
Mm-hmm.
There's like Jared and I both wrote product reviews for Magic Magazine for I did it for about 3 years. I think he did it for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Almost no one that I knew in the magic world knew that we were writing for the magazine because they didn't read the magazine. Right? Like, so the people who are subscribing to magic periodicals
Right.
overlaps the people that I meet at close-up conventions, but certainly isn't the same group. So there's this
Right.
base of readership here. There's the base of people who just go to conventions because they go to their local clubs, and then they go to the bigger conventions because they found out about them at the local clubs, but they don't ever read the magazines. There are the people who just know magic because they've read magic books. There are people that just know magic because of the Tony Hassini videos.
Mm.
That's all of their, like, it would have to be because there's so many hours and hours of footage of so many people doing things. It's like, if
Yeah.
you're subscribing to that, that's probably all of what your interest is, and all of what you're doing is what's on there.
Oh,
And you
right.
don't know about the magazines, or you don't know about the books, or you don't even know about the big conventions.
Right.
And there are people who are just performers who have no interest in the magic marketplace, wouldn't sell anything.
Mm-hmm.
They're just going to do their gigs.
Mm-hmm.
So they're all in different pockets, little pocket universes of what it is to be a magician.
Right.
And I say they're all okay. They've all, to a certain extent or another, existed at least as long as people have been trying to sell stuff to magicians.
Mm-hmm.
But the oldest way that it is the performer who doesn't share anything, who just does their show, who learned by watching or learned from a mentor or something like that, and just gets on stage and does the thing and goes home.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's
Yeah.
right. They're all magicians to one extent or another, but not necessarily having the same kind of experience. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you've got people now who all the magic they know from one YouTube channel or something, or they
Yeah.
only know it through exposure videos that 9-year-olds are posting on
Yeah.
YouTube, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like these people are also magicians. They've
Right.
never heard of Magic Live.
Yeah.
They've never heard of the Genie Convention or Genie
Yeah.
Magazine or anything.
Yeah.
Unless it comes up in the channel, then maybe they'll know about it.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm a
but
barber by trade, so it's the same thing. Barbering is like the second oldest profession aside from probably prostituting.
mhm,
And it's now it's all these guys learning on YouTube and all, and that's great that they're learning that. But when you're going to barbering college, you're learning the history of barbering and the barber pole and the bloodletting and all of it. It goes, people don't realize that when you go to barber college, it goes in depth. It's a full course on the history of barbering, how it's changed, through the 40s, 50s, 60s, just a whole thing of history. And then you come to learning how to cut hair and it doesn't match up with the history, right?
Mhm.
So it's really interesting to be in a profession aside from magic where it is really old and it's not being taught correctly, and being on another side of the spectrum of trying to make a difference in that industry of almost going back to the way that makes sense, that
Mhm.
can bring an art forward, because it is an art. I've been around a lot of barbers that do cut in what we call a traditional way. We can cut any sort of style that you want, hairstyle, haircut, and then style it a certain way. But it's a lot of the times magicians are like, oh, these clippers suck, and it's like, no, that's a user, that's a user situation. And I find it, yeah, it's interesting to find a parallel where that's happening in the industry now, where there is a brand now who is focused on bringing it all the way back to the 1800s, and they have a shop in the same way, and they're teaching it, very similar. And the quality of those haircuts is significantly better than what Great Clips or Fantastic Sam's, or because we're taking the time to explain this is the right way to achieve this haircut. Doesn't
Right.
take an hour to do a haircut. We dial it in for 25 minutes. We talk to you and all this other stuff. So that's kind of how I see part of the magic world. I think it's kind of not reversing, but I think it's going back to, there's a group of magicians that go back to the way it just makes sense to do it this way, because I don't know. I get a lot of flack for that, but
Well, the thing to keep in mind, I think, is that there's not a way for everyone to get to the same level.
right.
Like that won't be the case. Even like attempting to shift the art form forward is a thing that doesn't quite happen. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's just not the way that it works. Now
Right.
getting yourself better, now that's something that you can do. You can
Mm-hmm.
improve and pay attention to things that you weren't paying attention to and get results that you weren't getting. And by moving yourself in one direction, really what you're doing is every time you're getting better, you're seeing more people that aren't as good or aren't paying attention to the things that you were paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to seem like it's getting worse the better that you get.
Yeah.
Because whoever is the best conjurer on the planet is looking back at the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what pathetic. Like right right, it's like they're not even doing the thing right. they
Yeah.
don't they don't know they don't know about XYZ. I can't
Right.
even say what the thing is because it's something that I don't know,
Right.
but this person does. And they're undoubtedly people further along the line than I am that know more than me that look at what I'm doing and they're like, no, it's not great.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm looking at people who aren't paying attention to what I'm doing and going, this is what I would change.
Yeah.
This is how they can get to here.
Yeah.
The more magicians there are, the more people you'll have at the bottom end of that, the fewer you'll have at the top end.
Right.
Like having more magicians overall will ultimately lead to individuals, outliers that are further along the line. Just statistically, you'll have people who know nothing. You'll have people who know
Yeah.
essentially everything.
Yeah.
But at no point will the bell curve cease to be a bell curve.
Right.
It will still be a distribution of everyone at all their different skill levels. Now,
Yeah.
the thing that's changed dramatically as we've gotten more magicians, I say in the last 200 years, as this magic market has existed, is the access to information. Is you
Mm.
knowing that they're out there and you being able to see their shows because they're
Right.
posting them on Vimeo,
Right.
right? Like somebody posted a terrible show and you looked at it and you're like, why would you do that? Because they don't know. They don't know
Yeah.
it's bad. They think it's
Yeah.
good. They're proud of it. They're glad they did a show.
Yeah.
Um, And maybe it's not that bad. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's bad because of where I am on that bell curve and
Right.
seeing things that I would have done differently.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, yeah, I wouldn't try to move the bell curve over. Just move yourself. Just get better at
Yeah.
that. And if you can help somebody else along the way that's trying to get to the part of the curve that you're on, then you help them out, right? Like that's
100%.
that's the thing to do. But
I got off that train a long time ago.
right, right.
What do you wish more magicians understood about their craft?
Hmm. I suppose I just wish that more understood how powerful it can be. If you see what all it can do and you just decide, okay, that's fine. I just don't want to go in that direction. That's
Mm-hmm.
fine. But not knowing that those avenues exist, uh, that feels a little sad to me.
Yeah.
Like thinking that it can only be one thing. But but again, if it makes them happy, if it's what they want it to be, then I don't think it needs to change for my benefit.
Yeah.
But but if they want it to be more, just knowing that there are these other options, that there are other notes that you can play with the same instrument, then I think it makes it a lot more enriching, a lot more interesting.
Absolutely. I'm gonna wrap it up here with a couple more questions, if that's okay. Um, what's next for Dark Arts Press? What's do you have? I'm the Invisible College has you pretty occupied right now, so I'm pretty sure that. Do you want to grow that? Do you want that to be the Invisible College where you're doing Way of the Wizard sort of stuff with you and your friends and having them come and do something on there? But have you even thought about that? I don't
I
know.
mean, there's potential for that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
but not so much. Like it's we're we're never really trying to grow that much. We're like Dark Arts Press grows out of necessity,
Mm,
essentially. It was much more difficult for me to respond back to everyone's questions about what's in a book on a DM on Instagram than
right.
to just have a website that says this is a picture of it. Here's the
Right.
table of contents. Right. Now I don't
Yeah.
have to give you my PayPal. You just click the button and it's there.
Yeah.
Uh it's not it's but while it does make a little bit of money, it's not we're we're lazy. I don't know. Like, we don't care about that too much. We're not trying to grow
Yeah.
a brand. We're not trying to be,
Yeah.
you influencers in that way.
Yeah.
We're just trying to share the things that we do, and having a website for that helps us to do that. In a similar fashion, the Invisible College is helping to make sure that if people are interested in these courses that I've done already and the ones that I am planning to put more out on there, that they have access to them and that there's kind of a permanent place and that you didn't just have to see an Instagram post on a particular week 3 years ago to have been into the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so it's essentially just not trying to hide the stuff that shouldn't be hidden.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, as far as Dark Arts Press, I mean, the most recent thing was Lesser Magic that you mentioned, which came out last year and is available on darkartspress.com. Uh, I mean, if you notice our publishing schedule, the last books I published were You and Me and the Devil Makes Three and Post-Digitation, and those both came out in 2020. So
Yeah.
it takes a long time from writing the thing to get the book put together, and often it takes a long time to decide that I'm going to write a book or to find the time to do that in the first place. Um, so yeah, next book, I mean, it would have to be years down the line because I haven't written it yet. I haven't
Yeah.
started writing a book or anything because I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the next thing would be.
Yeah.
Um, but as it happens, if I start writing, then eventually there will be a book there, and then eventually Jared will have time to edit it and put it together, and then there'll be another book, right? It just happens organically as needed rather than trying to respond to market forces and being like,
Right.
oh, we need to get back in there with something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
Um, that's just not quite how
Becomes
we
a
do
different
it.
monster.
It's and I mean you tend to I'm not having nearly as many ideas of new performance pieces and things because I have so much material of my own that I'm often doing those things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and especially for it to be something that I'm doing that is enough mine, like methodologically, to share in a format like that.
Right.
Um, yeah, there are things that I love performing that yes, I have a presentation for, but it's not my thing.
Right.
Um, yeah, so having the right kind of material to fit into a book like that, that's not retreading ground that we've already done, is it'll just take time.
Yeah.
It's like when I think it's in the afternoon interviews, the book about Marcel Duchamp. The guy asks him, I don't remember what the number is, but they they said, why did you only paint 11 paintings, or it's some number like that? And he says, I only had 11 ideas. You know, it's like like
What there's nothing more, nothing
whoa,
less.
whoa, right? And
Yeah.
this is somebody who
Yeah.
was offered a good amount of money to just live his life and give one painting a year to a rich family.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, I did that already.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. Not
100%.
not to say that I'm anywhere on the level of Marcel Duchamp, but it's the same idea of like I'm not gonna create magic effects for the purpose of publishing them. But the things that we have out there, uh, trying to keep those accessible and keep those out there so that people hopefully will enjoy them and learn them and make use of them. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Do you ever think about your impact? I'm curious to know, do you ever think about your impact on what you're doing and what you're putting out there in terms of for other wizards?
I
Do you ever
mean,
just like, oh wow, like this is changing
you always
wizards
hope
and
that it will. Like,
yeah,
if you write a thing, you want it to touch someone's heart, you know. And hearing back from people who the words have been meaningful for is very meaningful for me. Like it's something that I do love to hear, you know, that feedback. Um, but at the same time, I also know that, like you said, some people are reading it and they don't get it.
yeah,
Like it's not their thing. Um, but but the things that we're sharing, I say it's usually the stuff that I think is most important. It's usually the stuff that's had the biggest impact on me personally.
right,
And that's why it's like, look, this is this is the thing. This is what I think it's all about. Um, Especially like a book like Post-Digitation. I didn't know what to think as we're putting it out. It's the thing that we made that we've been the happiest with.
right,
But it's also such a weird book.
yeah,
I've never read a magic book like it. But even when I read it, I'm like, wow, like this is like
we all have that same reaction.
it that's part of why the new
Yeah,
book is called Lesser Magic, is to take some of the heat off. It's like we don't have to compete with ourselves.
right,
It's not about outdoing what we did before. Um, but these are also ideas, right? This is also important stuff. Uh, yeah, yeah. I mean, I I still don't know if I'll write a book as good as Post-Digitation again,
don't cut
because
yourself short.
but it just happened organically, right?
Yeah,
It happened through automatic writing. It happened through ritual,
yeah,
through just having a writing ritual, and these words were just coming out. I wasn't planning them. That's just what happened, and I ended up with a bunch of essays.
Yeah.
And then I send all those essays over to Jared, and I'm like, here, right,
Yeah.
right. I don't know what this is, but I think it's a thing, and
Right.
this is what it's called, right? I
Right.
have a title for it,
Let's put a
but
cover on it,
it's
back
like,
on it.
should we publish this
Right.
or not? Like, and I'm glad that we did, because it's such a strange little book, but
It's a great book.
the most powerful thing to me. But yeah, doing that, and the Invisible College stuff is, I've got a couple of other things to put up there when I find time.
Yeah.
First, I've got to finish the biggest course, is the framing course that's going on right now.
11 weeks is a long time.
Yeah.
Doing something like that.
Yeah.
Where can people find it? What are the links for it? How can we get in touch with you if anyone wants to?
So my website is johnwilsonwizard.com. The books and things like that are available on darkartspress.com. Both of those have links to the Invisible College, which is the invisiblecollege.thinkific.com. Right now there's the tarot course on there and the framing course that's underway. Anybody who's in Dallas in the month of March, if you want to see Box, to play about the life of Henry Box Brown, was a slave who mailed himself to freedom. And became a magician and hypnotist and that kind of stuff. That's the play that I'm consulting for now, and it should be running through the month of March at the Undermain Theater in Dallas. So don't know where everybody is geographically, but you should come out and see some of that.
Incredible. The last thing I'll leave everybody with is my previous guest, Noah Levine, out of New York City, left you a very kind note and question and was curious. And his question was, what was the last or most memorable dream you had about magic? Literal dream.
So we dream every night that we're asleep, and we know this from studies, dream studies, where they'll wake the sleeper up and ask them what's happening, and there's always an answer. There's, I was at the supermarket and XYZ was happening, or I was swimming with sharks, or right. You wake them up at any point, and there's always some experience going on, but we normally don't remember what the dreams are. My wife Brooke, her one of her photo professors, Susan K. Grant, went through an extensive dream study where they woke her up and asked her what was going on, and then she took the images that were from the recordings of her saying, this is where I was in my dream, and incorporated that into her art, right? So these wonderful photographs of shadows that form crazy spooky figures and things. So I hope the most recent magic dream was one that I just forgot about from last night, right? I hope they're happening all the time. I guess all of them are magical in their ways, but yeah, I hope there was a very literal one last night.
Incredible. Thank you so much for taking time today to speak with me.
Of course. Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's it for this session. If you got something out of it, follow the podcast, leave a review, and share it with someone who would too. It might not seem like much, but every follow and review helps the MO sessions get discovered by more people who dig these conversations. For more of my writing, magic, stories, thoughts, and everything in between, check out The Dope on Substack. You can keep up with the MO sessions on Instagram at MOSessionPod, and if you want to follow everything else I'm working on, I'm at 1BennyEDALS. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next session.